Catherine Eddowes was ripped here.
Found here, any round. Just here, if your calculations are right.
Then the ripper was off. That way, towards Goulston Street.
To wash off the blood and do his writing on the wall.
Back to Whitechapel. Back home.
Here. Mary Ann Nichols was murdered. Right here.
What a place to die.
What a place to live. Even now.
Fancy something a bit more salubrious? Like, say, Sandringham?
Sandringham. You really pushing this one?
Leaning on it a bit.
Grounds?
The evidence of Thomas Edmund Alex Stowell, Commander of Her Majesty's Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, Doctor of Medicine and Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons.
Reasonable background.
He was a child when the murders were committed, and is said to remember the excitement they caused.
Forget hysterical memory. Where's his evidence?
Dr. Stowell wrote an article in The Criminologist in 1970 with a headline, Jack the Ripper, a solution, question mark? And it was picked up by 3,000 papers all over the world.
Yeah, I read them. But he didn't name names, did he?
But Stowell had a suspect. He called him S and offered a nickname. Collar and Cuffs.
Lots of collar, lots of cuff.
His Grace Albert Victor Christian Edward, Duke of Clarence and Avondale and Earl of Athlone, grandson of Queen Victoria, eldest son of Edward, Prince of Wales, and heir presumptive to the throne.
And also Jack the Ripper.
I believe Dr. Stowell thought so.
But he didn't say so.
According to Dr. Stowell, S was the heir to power and wealth.
Well, Clarence certainly was that.
And Stowell described his grandmother as a stern Victorian matriarch. And he says she outlived him.
Well, Queen Victoria was the stern Victorian matriarch.
And she did outlive him. Oh. Clarence died young in 1892, nearly 10 years before Victoria. And then Stowell says his father was a gay cosmopolitan.
Not half he wasn't.
And his mother, says Stowell, was very beautiful. Judge for yourself. Princess Alex.
So far, perfect fit. But it's not enough.
Stowell goes into a lot of detail. Stowell said that S went on a cruise around the world with a group of other boys when he was 16.
Did Clarence?
Yes, but he wasn't 16. He was 15. He and his brother George went round the world with a group of naval cadets on HMS Bacante. All Stowell had wrong is the age.
Yeah, but the mysterious S could have been any one of the other young aristocratic gentlemen on board the Bacante. You need more.
There is more. According to Stowell, the mysterious S contracted syphilis on the cruise.
Do you have evidence of that?
Well, no. It's hardly the sort of thing you're going to put in the ship's log, is it?
Oh.
But according to Stowell, S got back to England before he was 19, and at 21 he was given a commission in the army. Clarence got back to England just before he was 19, and at 21 was given a commission in the army, the 10th Hussars.
Oh, that fits.
But Stowell says that S resigned his commission when he was 24.
But Clarence didn't.
No, Clarence never resigned his commission.
So it's not a perfect fit?
Well, it's not perfect, no, but most of the facts about S fit Clarence, including the collar and cuffs.
Well, what about his actual movements on crucial dates?
I found out where he was supposed to have been, and from a very good class of witness.
Victim number 1, Nichols. Friday, 31st of August, 1888.
Now, from August the 20th to the 31st, Clarence was reported to have been in Yorkshire, staying either with the Walker family at Sandhutton or with Lord Down at Danby Lodge.
He could have slipped off to Whitechapel in order to kill Mary Ann. So, number 2, Chapman. Saturday the 8th of September.
No definite information. Clarence was probably at the cavalry barracks in York. He was stationed there.
But he could have been in Hanbury Street with Dark Annie. So...
jump on to November the 9th, Mary Jane Kelly. According to his mother's engagement diary, Clarence was at Sandringham right through that period, and on November the 9th, there was a party for his father's birthday.
Still no tight alibi. Could have slipped away. So, back to the double event, Stratton Eddowes, Sunday the 30th of September.
According to the court circular, Clarence was in Balmoral at that time, having lunch with Queen Victoria.
Oh, not a bad alibi, sitting down to lunch with the Queen of England, 470 miles away. If 10 hours later.
So, it wasn't Clarence, unless we can call Queen Victoria a liar.
Agreed, sir. Can we forget him?
Not entirely. Clarence, our Eddie, was a funny case. Dissipated was the gentlest word used to describe him.
So he led a gay life.
In every sense of the word.
Want me to sound like a judge? This is an inquiry into murder, not morals.
But the morals could have led to the murders.
I am down on whores.
No. But I'm not so sure that these were random killings.
Well, what else links them apart from the throat cutting and body ripping?
Mary Jane Kelly was the last victim. It was she who the Ripper was after. And when he found her, he stopped.
Prove it.
Look at it this way. It's names and local geography. Mary Jane Kelly lived in Miller's Court just off Dorset Street. Chapman, Dark Annie. Last seen alive, 35 Dorset Street. Stride, long lives. Her bloke lived at 35 Dorset Street. Eddowes, locally known as Kate Kelly, from the bloke that she lived with.
Looking in a fairly confined area for a name. Without a good description, it's possible. But why?
Because Mary Jane Kelly came to Dorset Street, at least to Miller's Court, from a fashionable house in the West End.
Ah, now what was it the fellow she was living with had to say about that?
Then she lived in a fashionable house in the West End. And then she came to the East End. She took lodgings in Pennington Street. And when she was there, a man named Morganstone lived with her. We used to live in Dorset Street.
That's Dorset Street again.
And a fashionable house in the West End.
Right. Now, I think that fashionable house was in Cleveland Street, just off the Tottenham Court Road.
Yes, I thought you might. And your only reason for saying that is because Stoll said there was a house in Cleveland Street frequented by well-to-do homosexuals and implied that S went there. But what would Mary Jane Kelly be doing in a male brothel?
There was more than one scandal in Cleveland Street.
Back on morals.
Sort of. But it's more like politics, scandals and hushings up.
Lead me to the White House.
I need you to Scotland Yard. In 1890, I mean.
By then, Mary Jane Kelly was dead.
Patience. Things moved a little slower in Victoria's august age, and bubbles lasted a little longer before they burst.
Yes, and there was a ripper link, wasn't there? Because the same policeman was in charge of both cases. Inspector Aberline investigated both Cleveland Street and the Ripper murders.
You know that?
Oh, I have my sources, too. No. Tell me what you got from Cleveland Street.
Well, Aberline didn't do very well in the little matter of Cleveland Street. It begins with a boy called Swinscoe and a PC called Hanks.
I questioned the boy Swinscoe on the morning of July 2nd. He is employed as a delivery boy at the General Post Office. I informed him that a number of thefts had occurred at the post office and questioned him about reports that he had been spending money freely. I learned from him that he had previously been employed as a servant at the Marlborough Club.
Founded by Edward, Prince of Wales.
Swinscoe informed me that he had been detected thieving at the club, but he had not been charged due to the intervention of Lord Arthur Somerset.
Extra equerry, and superintendent of the stables to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
I continued to question Swinscoe regarding the money he'd been spending. He finally informed me that he'd been invited by a colleague of his, a clerk, Newlove, to a certain house, number 19 Cleveland Street. There he and Newlove took part in offences involving other male persons.
That's what the estimable Dr. Stoll was talking about.
But where was Abilene?
As a result of information received by P.C. Hanks, the youth Newlove was questioned. He and the boy Swinscoe both subsequently made statements regarding the reason they had been invited to the house in Cleveland Street and the actions they had performed there. I questioned Newlove further on July the 7th and again the following day. Newlove then gave me the name of a clergyman, Veck.
Acting on instructions, on July 9th, I commenced observations on number 19 Cleveland Street. I observed several men entering and leaving the house. On July 10th, I observed furniture being carried from the house. Upon making inquiries, I discovered that the furniture belonged to the landlord of the house, a Mr. Charles Hammond.
I gave orders that the clergyman Veck should be arrested. The man Hammond is reported to have left on July 6th. He is now in France. The arrest of Veck was carried out on August 20th.
Yep. What sort of circus is he running this time? He's got statements from two lads saying they've been taking part in a model act in a male brothel and being paid for it. He's got the name of the man who paid them. He's got a watch on the house. And yet this man Hammond is off to the continent.
Maybe with his furniture.
And 6 weeks before anybody's arrested.
But Veck and Newlove were charged on August the 27th.
Sentences?
Want to guess?
Well, they were a bit fierce in those days.
Not in this case. Newlove got 9 months. Veck, the older man, the respectable clergyman and prime mover, got 4 months.
Funny.
Not everybody thought so, especially not Ernest Park, editor of an aggressive campaigning newspaper, the North London Press.
What we and the British people want to know is the answer to 2 questions. Why did the man Veck, a minister of the gospel, receive a sentence of 4 months, while a clergyman facing a similar charge only last year was sentenced for what were less serious offences to no less than life imprisonment? And why, if the police and the authorities knew the nature of the house at 19 Cleveland Street on the 2nd of July, why was it a full 7 days before a constable was sent to watch that house, while the man Hammond was permitted to move out his furniture and take himself off to France?
2 very reasonable questions I've already asked for. No, I reckon Abilene wasn't trying.
Well, at least he'd sent down Veck and Newlove.
9 months and 4 months.
Why, you're the one who's always telling me, charge 'em. The rest is up to the courts. 3 men were working hard to get his post office boys, his key witnesses, out of the country.
Off to France for the riding.
No, Australia.
Really making sure?
And they almost made it. According to one of the boys, he was told, the reason we want to get you away is so that you wouldn't give evidence against you-know-whom.
And who was you-know-whom?
Somebody important enough for a solicitor to try and silence witnesses. Important enough for pressure on the police to get very strong indeed. On November the 16th, in the North London Press, Ernest Park named names.
The guilty parties include a number of well-known aristocrats, among them Lord Arthur Somerset and Lord Euston. Lord Euston, it is believed, has departed from this country and gone to Peru. It is scandalous that men of position are allowed to leave the country and defeat the ends of justice, because their prosecution would inculpate even more highly placed and distinguished personages.
I've never been to Peru.
Neither had Lord Euston. Now, if Mr. Park had stuck to Lord Arthur Somerset, nobody could have touched him. But Lord Euston was in London, and he saw that issue of the North London Press. And he sued Mr. Park for libel, not seeking damages, but for criminal libel.
In July last year, my lord, 2 persons were convicted of a criminal offence in regard to the particular house in Cleveland Street we are concerned with here. If, with those persons of humble origin, there are or were associated persons of position, then I would be surprised to hear any argument suggesting that it was not in the interest of the public that names such as these should be published.
Mr. Lockwood, opening for the defence.
But vague and wordy.
Well, he had problems. Several people thought they'd seen Lord Euston going into 19 Cleveland Street. Only one claimed he'd been inside with him.
Just the sort to appeal to 12 good men and true, I'll bet.
My name is John Saul. I live at number 15 Old Compton Street, Soho. I used to know a man called Charles Hammond. I knew him when he lived just off the Haymarket. I remember he moved to 19 Cleveland Street. That was, just after Christmas 1886. I went to live there about the end of March 1887. People used to come to the house. I introduced some of them myself. One of them is a person who is here in court. I hadn't seen him there before. That was about April or May 1887. I met him in the Piccadilly. Between the Albany and Sackville Street it was.
According to the Times, the witness then gave evidence of a character unfit for publication. And then Sir Charles Russell, appearing for Lord Euston, had a go.
Mr. Saul, would I be correct in stating that since as far back as 1875, you led a grossly immoral life in Dublin, and that since coming to London in 1879, you have continued to lead a similar life?
I have had one or two jobs in the theatre, and sometimes I look after apartments for ladies that I know.
I see, for ladies. And do you remember a prosecution held in Dublin in 1884 in connection with certain scandals there?
Yes.
And were you told at that trial that your evidence would not be accepted because you could not be believed on oath?
That's not true.
Then your evidence was accepted?
Well, no. But it wasn't because they didn't believe me. I think it was because they said it was too old.
You think? When were you approached to give evidence in this case?
A young gentleman from Captain Webb's office called to see me. I think his name was Ashley. I wouldn't say anything to him then. And then he called the next day. And then he called on Saturday morning and asked me if I would make my mind up. I said I would do it if it was for Mr. Park and not for anybody else.
Mr. Park is a friend of yours, then?
No. Oh, certainly not. Oh, Mr. Park isn't a friend of mine. I thought he was being acted very unfairly, too.
I'd hate to have to hang a case of mine on him.
Well, you can see Park's problem, though. You have to prove a man visited a male brothel. Your only witnesses are going to be the regulars in that brothel.
Though he didn't prove that Lord Euston went to 19 Cleveland Street.
He didn't have to. Lord Euston admitted it.
I was walking down Piccadilly one night last year when a fellow handed me a card. End of May it was, about 11 o'clock at night. It was a printed card. It said, C. Hammond, 19 Cleveland Street. Written on the top, it said, Pt.6. About a week later, I was walking back from the Garrick, about 11, and I thought I'd go to the place. Went there in a cab. I rang the bell. The door was opened by some fellow, rather stout, dark moustache, going thin on top. He took me into a room on the right-hand side. He asked me for a sovereign. I gave it to him. I asked him where the Pt.6 were going on. He said, there's nothing of that sort here. Then the fellow made me an improper proposal. I asked him what the devil he meant by saying a thing like that to me, and I told him. If he didn't let me out at once, I'd knock him down. He did, and I went home.
When this man handed you this card, Lord Euston, what did you do with it?
I put it in my pocket and read it when I got home.
And did you consider, or not, that it referred to some filthy exhibitions?
I knew what pose plastique were. I have seen some pose plastique that you couldn't call filthy.
Did you consider that it referred to some kind of exhibition which you would be ashamed for it to be known among your friends that you had visited it?
No, sir. I don't think I should be ashamed amongst my friends for that.
This is a libel of a very atrocious character. It imputes to Lord Euston heinous crimes, revolting to one's notion of all that is decent in human nature. The defendants plead that it is justified, but I must point out to you, there has been no attempt to prove that Lord Euston did depart for Peru, as the defendant claimed. Indeed, as regards the allegation that he left the kingdom, there has not been one single particle of evidence. We now come to the witness Saul, a more melancholy spectacle, a more loathsome object I cannot imagine. You will have to ask yourselves whose word you prefer, the oath of a man who, according to his own account, is liable to be prosecuted and sent for penal servitude, or the oath of the prosecutor, Lord Euston.
Rough, but reasonable. Park was found guilty?
Yes.
What did he get?
In a minute. The judge was rough, but after the verdict, he got sympathetic.
I am prepared to postpone sentence until tomorrow. Should you wish to communicate with your counsel or make any submission yourself?
I would only like to say, my lord, that in this matter I acted in perfect good faith. What I published simply in what I believed to be the public interest. I did not, as counsel appearing against me has suggested, publish the libel without what I believe to be and have since found not to be adequate evidence. I cannot state what that evidence was. And I was, of course, misled.
I am afraid that only mentioning it is not evidence. The libel is, I think I may say, I do not mind telling you, exceedingly bad.
I can only say, my lord, that I had evidence at that time.
I'm afraid I must have more than that. You shall have until tomorrow morning if you like to think it over.
I think it would be better for all parties under the circumstances if your lordship would give sentence now.
Gave him 12 months.
Not what you deserve. In a court of the case like that.
It's one way of looking at it.
And you have another way.
Yes. Lord Arthur Somerset, a credit to the Prince of Wales, is in France, smuggled out before a warrant can reach him, and safe from Inspector Barlow. And Park, the other man who knew too much, is in jail, and the lid is firmly on Cleveland Street.
Until Detective Chief Superintendent Watt comes along.
Detective Chief Superintendent Watt will draw your attention to 3 points. 1. Park, at the end there, was more or less telling the judge that he'd been set up, that he'd been fed evidence to name Lord Euston, and as soon as he'd committed himself, somebody pulled the mat out from under him. And 2, Lord Euston wasn't exactly an unimpeachable character. After all, he'd married a prostitute for a start. But he'd certainly earned the gratitude at some time or another of the Prince of Wales. Because Euston was accepted as ADC to Edward VII as soon as he became king.
For services rendered?
For agreeing to be put up at no risk to himself as the bait which would spring the trap to silence Park. And 3, the point that Park made in his libelous article.
It is scandalous that men of position are allowed to leave the country and defeat the ends of justice, because their prosecution would inculpate even more highly placed and distinguished personages.
You've got to be a very highly placed and distinguished personage to rank above Lord Euston and Lord Arthur Somerset.
In fact, you have to be.
A member of the royal family. To be precise, Eddie, Duke of Clarence, eldest son of the Prince of Wales and heir presumptive.
And dissipated and gay.
And among the men who patronised number 19 Cleveland Street. Isn't that why Abilene was blocked off? To hush up the fact that the Prince of Wales' eldest son had been there as well?
Look, what if he had? This is an inquiry into Jack the Ripper.
I haven't forgotten.
So what's your story?
It starts in Cleveland Street. It leads to Whitechapel. And it is told by someone who is alive and well and living in London, Joseph Sickert. It's a very odd story, and it's a story that's never been told before.
My name is Joseph Sickert. My father was the painter, Walter Sickert. When I was a small boy, I can remember my mother telling me over and over again that I had to be very careful not to say anything or do anything which would give the police or the authorities any reasons to question me or any excuse for them to take me away. She said to me that my grandmother had suffered terribly at the hands of the authorities, and that a servant girl died in a terrible way, and that I had to be very careful. I just thought it was another story that others told. I sort of thought, if you don't behave, the bogeyman will get you. Then, when I was a bit older, in my teens, I asked my father about the story. I kept on nagging him and asking questions about it, and eventually I broke his reserves down. He said, your grandfather was the Duke of Clarence. I laughed, and he said, it's no laughing matter. It's all a bit of a mess, because you're all bloody Catholics. Then he told me the whole story. When Eddie, the Duke of Clarence, was 20, his mother thought it would be a good idea if he met an artist and writers, as well as just usual people who made up court circles at the time. To meet the painter, she arranged, for him to meet the painter, Walter Sickert, whose family had been painters to the own royal court in Denmark. At that time, Walter Sickert lived in Cleveland Street area. When Prince Edward went there during his vacations from Cambridge, he was passed off as Sickert's younger brother, as known as Mr. S. He also met a close friend of Sickert's, a girl called Anne Elizabeth Crook, who worked in the tobacco shop at number 20. She actually lived at number 6 Cleveland Street. She was very beautiful, and in fact, she looked very much like Eddie's mother. Eddie fell in love with her. She became pregnant, and there was also sort of a wedding ceremony at St. Saviour's private chapel in 1888. The two lovers, Clarence and Anne Elizabeth, were parted after a police raid on a party in Cleveland Street, and Anne Elizabeth was in Guy's hospital for 156 days before she had been put into a small hospital at 367 Fulham Road. She was supposed to be mentally ill. She was kept in the Fulham Road Hospital until her death in 1921. The servant girl also disappeared at the same time. Her name was Mary Kelly. The little girl, Alice Margaret, was then looked after by old Walter Sickert with the help of various local friends. One day, when she was about 7 years old, in 1892, a woman friend was taking her for a walk in Drury Lane. A carriage ran the child down. The driver of the carriage was recognised as John Netley, a man who had been used as an outside coachman by Clarence on his visits to Sickert. A man who knew the story of the lovers and their child, and their Irish servant girl, Mary Kelly. The child, Alice Margaret, was fortunate. After a spell in Charing Cross Hospital, she recovered from her injuries. Mary Kelly was not so lucky. She was, of course, a Catholic girl. She was known to the nuns of the convent in nearby Harewood Place. She went first of all to their sister convent, which was in the East End. What happened then was that various people high in the government and the royal household became very worried indeed about the possibility of the news getting out that the heir presumptive to the throne of England had married and had a child, and that the child had been born of a Catholic mother. You have to remember it was a time when the possibility of revolution was thought to be a very real one, and that the problems and violence surrounding Ireland were at their height. It was decided that Mary Jane Kelly would have to be silenced. The operation was undertaken by the driver, John Netley, and the royal physician, Sir William Gull, to conceal the dangerous motive behind Mary Kelly's death and the inquiries they were making for her. She was killed as the last of 5 women in a way that made it look like the random work of a madman. The child, however, survived. She was protected by Walter Sickert and had 2 sons by him. The first one was Charles, who disappeared at the age of 2, and I am the other son.
Well, that's quite a story. Do you believe it?
Joseph Sickert believes it.
Ah, yes, but what Mr. Sickert believes isn't evidence. Where's his proof?
There is some circumstantial evidence. Now, this girl that Clarence is said to have married and had a daughter by, Anne Elizabeth Crook, she's said to have lived at number 6 Cleveland Street. So I went back through the records. The rate book for Cleveland Street, 1888. Number 6, basement. Recorded is paying the rates Elizabeth Cook.
Oh, Crook, near enough. What about a marriage certificate?
No record of that. But after a long time looking through Somerset House, I found something else. A birth certificate, dated April the 18th, 1885. A girl, Alice Margaret, place of birth, Marylebone Workhouse, name of mother, Annie Elizabeth Crook, confectionery assistant from Cleveland Street.
Name of father, blank.
So is his occupation. Then there's a cross, with alongside it the mark of Annie Elizabeth Crook, 6 Cleveland Street, Fitzroy Square.
Well, that supports Sickert's story.
Sickert also claims to have seen a christening certificate for the child. And on it, as one of the people present, the name Mary Jane Kelly.
Hey, now, that is evidence. Where is it?
Like so many of the vital pieces of paper in the Ripper saga, it's missing.
If it ever existed.
Well, there was an Elizabeth Crook who lived at 6 Cleveland Street. And she did work in a confectionery shop. And she did have a child, a girl, Alice Margaret, in 1885. Now, Sickert has a painting of his mother done by Sir William Orpen. And the name above it, Alice Crook Sickert.
So Cleveland Street, Elizabeth Crook, and maybe Mary Jane Kelly. But how does this lead to Whitechapel?
Sickert says Mary Kelly went to a convent in the East End. Now, in Whitechapel, there's a convent in Providence Row, Dorset Street, just 50 yards from Miller's Court, where Mary Kelly was killed. Now, one of the founders of that convent was a Cleveland Street solicitor, Edmund Bellord, who was a friend and sort of father figure to the artistic community there.
Right, so you have some proof that Elizabeth Crook lived there. You have proof that she had a child there. Mary Jane Kelly could well have gone to Dorset Street from there. But you've got a long way to go from birth and marriage to murder.
Sickert named 2 names. A coachman called Netley, who presumably did the strong-arm stuff, and the royal physician, Sir William Gull, who deliberately made the killings look like those of a madman. So I started looking for a man called Netley, a driver, and I found one. Born May 1860, and John Netley became a driver. On September the 26th, 1903, he was killed when the van he was driving went over a stone. He fell and was kicked on the head by one of the horses. The report of his death in the Marylebone Mercury.
But nothing to connect him with the murders?
No, nothing at all. Just the fact that Sickert was told that a man called Netley was involved and he was a driver. Now, a man called John Netley did exist, and he was about the right age, and he was a driver.
A link may be.
But the second name that Sickert gives is Sir William Gull. Now, there's no problem proving that he existed. Medical Register, 1888. Sir William Gull, M.D., F.R.C.P., F.R.S., physician to Guy's Hospital, physician in ordinary to Her Majesty Queen Victoria, to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and doctor to half London society.
Big shot.
But his name had been linked with the Ripper murders. And not only by Sickert, but by someone who, as far as I know, had never heard the Sickert story. By the man who pointed the finger at Clarence in the first place, Dr. Thomas Stowell. Now, he had that story about the famous Victorian medium, Lees, who, in a dream, saw the Ripper going into a large house in the West End. And on coming out of his trance, he trotted along with the police behind him, straight to the house of a famous West End physician.
This is all hearsay, third-hand hearsay at that.
But Stowell added something himself. Stowell said that Sir William had been seen more than once around and about Whitechapel on the night that a murder was committed.
Does he have evidence of that?
We'll never know. Stowell died very soon after he published his theory, and his son destroyed all his papers.
So another line of inquiry ending up in a brick wall and a question mark.
Well, there's no proof, I agree, but there are coincidences. Sickert was told by his father that the doctor involved was Sir William Gull, and Stowell, quite independently, said that the doctor involved was Sir William Gull. And there was a popular theory at the time that the Ripper was a surgeon, for obvious reasons, handy with a knife.
Yeah, but Gull was a physician and not a surgeon.
Ah, yes. But there is another coincidence. It all ties in with that strange tale from America.
Oh, our London clubman now in Chicago.
That's right. And quoting a certain Dr. Howard.
The story Dr. Howard has told is substantially correct, as indeed it should be, since Dr. Howard was one of a dozen London physicians who sat at a court of medical inquiry or as a commission in lunacy on one of their brother physicians. But it was definitely proved that the dreadful Jack the Ripper was no less a person than a physician in high standing, a man enjoying the patronage of the best society in the West End of London.
Again, a physician, not a surgeon, as you'd expect if it was some polished-up piece of gossip. But one more coincidence. According to the medical register for 1888, there was a Dr. Howard, and he did spend some time in the States around that time. And you remember Sickert had said that his grandmother, after her marriage to Clarence had been discovered, was tucked away in a hospital in Fulham? Well, Dr. Howard had an address at the St. George's Club in Hanover Square, and that club ran a charity hospital at number 367 Fulham Road. The address where Sickert says his grandmother died. And here is her death certificate.
Sir, you got a picture of him?
Who, Dr. Howard?
Sir William Gull. Let's add him to the gallery. Looks a bit more prepossessing than the others.
He was. He's a self-made man. Cured the Prince of Wales of typhoid and never looked back. He left £340,000.
Can you really see a man like Sir William Gull going down the East End and playing his part in the murder of 5 women?
You and I have arrested some more unlikely murderers in our time.
It's not the answer, and you know it.
It was the answer for Jack the Ripper. Because as long as he was a madman without a face, he was real enough. But when you try to put a human face to him, the whole thing becomes grotesque.
It was grotesque. And it happened. And there are 5 women dead to prove it. Killed, according to you, because a royal prince had sired a child.
An illegitimate child, with an illiterate shop girl as a mother and a Catholic.
But really important.
You want to bet? In 1890, the Duke of Clarence, our Eddie, wanted to marry a Catholic. At this time of royal blood, Princess Helene d'Orleans, daughter of the Comte de Paris.
Did he?
Not likely. According to Sir Philip Magnus Allcroft, the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, warned that the anger of the middle and lower classes might endanger the throne if it became known that he had even entertained the thought.
So the throne would certainly have been endangered if the first story had come out. Sir William Gull is the killer.
Well, Sir William had had some sort of a stroke, and he was an elderly man. And he was a Mason. And he must have known that he hadn't got long to live. One last service for the prince, whose life he had saved and whose doctor he'd been for nearly 20 years?
Some sort of motive, I suppose. But no hard evidence to connect Gull with the killings.
No hard evidence to connect anyone.
Just suspicions.
And a lot of suspects. We haven't even covered half of them. They range from an escaped guerrilla to King Leopold of the Belgians.
Oh, you didn't check on that one.
Oh, I did. Yes, I wrote to the Belgian Royal Archivist, checking dates, and I got a reply too. Dear sir, I have read, not without some astonishment, your letter, of which I could not, at first sight, decide whether it proceeds from a very thorough care to historical evidence, or from a very special application of the well-known British sense of humour.
Didn't go for the idea.
Not really.
Unless he's covering up as well.
As well? Are you starting to see rippers under every bed?
I'm not seeing anything. That's the problem. I get the feeling I'm not supposed to be seeing anything.
Like the writing on the wall?
Look, 5 murders, 8 inspectors, hundreds of coppers bumping into each other. Statements, inquest files, throw away the rubbish, and what are we left with? A few lines on a blackboard. It's just not enough.
Want to go on looking?
It's not in there. Not what we want.
Where is it? We've looked everywhere. Home Office, Scotland Yard, the files, even the closed ones. Nothing.
Well, that is just the point. There should be something. I mean, there isn't one single statement in any one of those files from a single copper saying, look, we thought it might have been so-and-so, but we can't prove it.
I never even got that far.
It's a matter of police work. Look. Eyewitnesses' descriptions. It's what we went for straight away. Any good cop does. We took it the way they had to then. 1 murder at a time and 1 question. Who saw Jack the Ripper? Mrs. Long did. She saw him talking to Annie Chapman.
Couldn't see the man's face except to notice he was dark. He had a brown deerstalker hat, and I think he had a dark coat on.
P.C. Smith.
I should say he was about 28 years of age. He was of a respectable appearance, but I could not say what he was.
The commercial traveller, Lavendre, gave Commissioner Smith a description of the man he'd seen talking to Eddowes.
Young, about the middle height, with a small fair moustache, dressed in something like Navy serge and with a deerstalker's cap.
3 descriptions, and they'd all fit half the men in London.
Right. But then we have Mary Jane Kelly, and they do get a description.
He was about 5 feet 8 inches, 34 or 35 years old. He had a dark complexion and a dark moustache turned up at the ends. He was wearing a long, dark coat, trimmed with astrakhan, a white collar, and a black necktie. There was a horseshoe pin fixed in it. He had a pair of dark spats with light buttons over button boots. And there was a massive gold chain on his waistcoat. His watch chain had a big seal with a red stone hanging from it. He had dark eyes and bushy eyebrows. He had no side whiskers and his chin was clean shaven.
Now that is a very good description of somebody.
If you believe him.
It doesn't matter whether we believe him. Inspector Aberline believed him. There's even a note in the Scotland Yard file saying so.
So?
So, after 5 murders, 5 very nasty murders which are getting nastier, they finally get a good description. But there's nothing in the file to show that anybody went looking for the toff that Hutchinson saw that night. I mean, if it had been us, we would have turned London upside down looking for somebody fitting that description.
We might have. Aberline didn't.
Aberline was a good copper.
He was a good copper in 1888.
Well, coppers are coppers and murder's murder in 1888 or 1988.
We're talking about Whitechapel in 1888. Listen to George Bernard Shaw. Letter to the Star. The riots in 1886 brought in £78,000 and a People's Palace. It remains to be seen how much these murders may prove worth to the East End in bread and circuses, Indeed, if the habits of duchesses only admitted of their being decoyed in Whitechapel backyards, a single experiment in slaughterhouse anatomy on an aristocratic victim might fetch in around $500,000 and save the necessity of sacrificing 5 women of the people.
Jack the Ripper is a social reformer. Yeah, well, it's as good as a lot of the other theories we've come against.
My point is that even to a social reformer like Shaw, the Ripper victims were just 5 women of the people. Useful as propaganda, yes, but not important as individuals. And he didn't particularly care who killed them.
Well, I care. I started this inquiry to find out, and I've had the feeling all along that somebody's been trying to stop me.
Because Jack the Ripper was a toff?
I don't know, but I do know a cover-up when I see one. The inquest on Mary Jane Kelly stopped before they'd even established time of death. No names of suspects on the files, no serious names anyway. And so lo and behold, 6 years later, along comes Sir Melville MacNaughton, and he's got 3 names. Puts them in a file for people like you and me to find. Only these names aren't mentioned anywhere in the entire case.
I agree. That is odd.
Odd? I think it's extraordinary. 3 names, and what names? I mean, 2 Russians no one's ever heard of, and then, hey presto, suspect number 3, M.J. Druitt.
He was sexually insane. And from private information, I have little doubt that his own family believed him to have been the murderer.
And what's the important thing about Druitt?
That his family suspected him?
No. That Sir Melville MacNaughton knew that he was dead.
And couldn't tell no tales.
And would stop nosy Parkers like you and me looking any further.
I don't know. I've never found it easy to believe in conspiracies.
I'm not going to try and persuade you.
You couldn't. Because I'll tell you what I think. I think they never got near him then, and I think we're not going to get anywhere near him now. All we know about him is that he was left-handed, possessed anatomical knowledge, was of average height, and wore a deerstalker. That's all we know, and that's all we're ever likely to know.
I think they did get near him then. I think they, whoever they were, knew precisely who Jack the Ripper was, and they made damn sure nobody could find out.
You think? Where's your evidence?
Number 12, Buckingham Gate, Southwest 1.
Eh?
I said, number 12, Buckingham Gate, Southwest 1.
I know that address.
Yeah. The offices of the Director of Public Prosecutions in their Cleveland Street Duke of Clarence scandal file.
Didn't even know there was one. A file, I mean.
Oh, there is. I asked about it. I wasn't following your line. I was interested in Abilene. And the DPP's office assured me that there were no names mentioned in it that were connected with the East End.
How do they know what names are or aren't connected with the East End?
Oddly enough, that's what I asked, too. So after a bit of arm twisting, they let me see it. I wasn't following up your line. All I wanted to see was if there was a name in it that I knew in connection with Jack the Ripper.
And it's there? Connection with Cleveland Street and Jack the Ripper?
I don't know.
But I thought you said...
I said they let me see a file. 3 files. But before I saw them, somebody had been through them and several documents had been removed.
Removed? Not missing? And some of the papers were missing from the Home Office files.
I said removed, and I mean removed.
How do you know?
Because an official there told me. When I was leaving, I said, there are no names mentioned in these that are of any interest to me. And he said, you should see some of the names in the papers we haven't let you see.
Names?
Names.
You might be able to make me believe in conspiracies after all.
I'm still not going to try. I haven't any evidence. But it's quite a thought, isn't it? Here we've been beating our brains out for months, trying to find out who was Jack the Ripper. People have been trying for 80 years. And the Director of Public Prosecutions may be sitting on a file, knowing the answer all along. Only he isn't telling.